Hello, my name is Maria Feliciano. I am an art historian and textile expert, and today we're going to be talking about textiles, commerce, and consumption in the Iberian Peninsula using a Mediterranean context. Traditionally, the approach to the study of textiles in the Iberian Peninsula has followed a binary system of oppositions. Muslim versus Christian, us versus them, in a progressive pattern of conquest and submission. Textiles have generally been studied as evidence of war booty and engagements of bellic kinds. Today we're going to be telling a much more complex story. And this story expands into the Mediterranean and outwards into Central Asia in order to illustrate the wide flow of goods and the circulation of luxury goods in and out of the Iberian Peninsula. Among the earliest textiles that we have been able to document is located presently at the treasury of San Isidoro of León, an 11th century foundation in Castile. The textile on the right that you see is the lining of the famous reliquary of St. Isidore of Seville, which arrived in 1062 at the Collegiate Church. Recently, carbon-14 dating has given us a new perspective on how to study this object. The early date, 9th to 10th century, of this textile predates the famous gift that Queen Sancha and King Ferdinand of León gave to the Collegiate Church. We also know that this is a Central Asian object that arrived from far east into present-day Uzbekistan, or the zone that we call Transoxiana. A very interesting aspect of early textile commerce and movement is that initially during the early medieval period it followed an east-west axis. They flowed from the eastern Mediterranean through different kinds of stops along ports in North Africa into the Iberian Peninsula using the trade winds, and then flowing eastwards back out into the eastern Mediterranean, carrying, of course, goods of various kinds from the Iberian Peninsula to the rest of the Mediterranean basin. Here, the presence, the strong political and geopolitical presence of the Fatimid Caliphate in Egypt is key. There is ample evidence of very early Fatimid pieces in the Iberian Peninsula, and in fact they seem to be part of the foundation of the taste for a very particular kind of luxury good that carries on for centuries. The idea of producing textiles in a combination of linen and silk, also in combination with metal thread, is a foundation, one can say, of Iberian taste. Here on the left you will see a textile fragment from San Pedro de Arlanza, one of the most important foundational churches and monasteries of Castile. And on the right, a recently discovered almaizar or veil from Palencia Cathedral, which has been carbon dated to the years 1025 to 1159, coinciding, of course, with the foundation of the Cathedral of San Antolin in Palencia. Both items seem to have been closely related to the foundation of very important ecclesiastical establishments in central Castile. The textile on the left has the added detail that it was removed from a little reliquary box, which you see in the background of that image, and inserted into the stone wall near the altarpiece of the church, meaning that it was considered to be a relic and an evidence of the antiquity of the church itself by the time that it went in. The objects such as these carried on their influence for centuries, and the image that you are seeing right now attests to this. It is a textile that was produced very likely in the Iberian Peninsula in imitation of goods that were fashioned in the Eastern Mediterranean. Here, in particular, we see pseudo-Coptic inscriptions adorning the textile. Coptic, of course, being the language of Christians in Egypt during the late antique and early medieval period. Here, of course, they say nothing, they have no content, but the alphabet is still used as a sign of status and hopefully perhaps deceiving the person purchasing these objects into making them believe that this might maybe be an Egyptian work. In the 12th century, there is a realignment of the commercial map of the Mediterranean basin. With the advent of the Maghrebi or Moroccan dynasties, we see that the flow of goods is really determined by their ability to trade, but to control the flow of goods in their realms, which included, of course, the Iberian Peninsula. So from going east-west, we are now really marking trade and control of goods and flow of ships north to south. This coincides with a period of great expansion in the naval commercial powerhouses that were the Genoese and the Pisans. So now in cahoots or with the good allowance of the Moroccans, the Genoese and the Pisans could trade at a scale that was unseen up until this point. Their trade arm expanded and extended well into the depths of Central Asia and carried out up into Northern Europe through a system of both local transmission and then, of course, of their own fleet of ships that moved all of these goods all over. The Genoese had an immense interest in the Iberian Peninsula, and they, along with other maritime empires, had trading houses in Seville, in Malaga, in Almeria, and in other port cities of the Iberian Peninsula. They had an enormous impact, in fact, in shipping and moving Nasrid goods from the Kingdom of Granada beginning in the 13th century and carrying on well into the 15th. A very good example of this is the terno de San Valero, or the ecclesiastical vestments associated with the cult to the saint Valerius in Roda de Isabena in Aragon. This is a set of ecclesiastical vestments that we know were purchased in Tarragona. The textiles were purchased in Tarragona. And then this brings us also to consider the importance of Catalan and Valencian seafarers in the transmission and in the movement of goods from the Kingdom of Granada into the northern realms of the Iberian Peninsula. Evidence also of the importance of the weaving workshops of the Nasrids expands into Castile as well. The famous chasuble of Sancho of Aragon, Archbishop of Toledo, is a textile that is magnificently conserved today in the Cathedral of Toledo. That it's made in a tapestry technique of incredibly rich raw materials that is connected to the techniques of the terno de San Valero and a series of other textiles as well. We have been able to identify a fragment of exactly the same technique and materials today at the Centre de Documentación and Museo Textil in Terrassa in Catalonia, and it bears an inscription with the Nasrid logo or motto, Wala ghaliba illallah, there is no victor but God. So we can really technically and also through inscriptions and epigraphic inscriptions tie these goods to Nasrid imperial workshops. And this is really what they were trading in: intensely refined techniques, very high quality raw material. This is silk wrapped in gold of the finest order. And I think this is really the key to understanding the whole phenomenon, is to think that it's been calculated that about 20% of Mediterranean industry during the medieval period had something to do with the textile trade and commerce, be it dyeing, raising silkworms, weaving, spinning the threads, etc. All of it amounted to an incredibly high percentage of industrial output during the medieval period. Textiles that we can connect much more closely with the Nasrid world are the textiles that emerge in the 14th and 15th centuries. Textiles that we can, in fact, also connect to the famous walls of the Alhambra Palace. The Nasrids develop a very distinctive style that was commercialized very, very effectively by the Genoese in particular, but also the Catalan and the Valencian seafarers. These examples that I'm bringing you here are basically the same textile pattern and technique woven in different moments and in different scales. So what we have are workshops producing meters upon meters upon meters of textile made for commercial trade, meaning for other markets in the Iberian Peninsula, but also in the rest of the Mediterranean. The same can be said of this type of textile here, where we find them in collections and we find them in cathedral treasuries all over the Iberian Peninsula, but they were woven using different chromatic combinations. Once these looms were set, they were just made to produce en masse, and if there was any change detected in the markets, simply the colors were switched and the objects re-commercialized very effectively. We're really talking about a grand scale that is proto-capitalistic, basically, in its foundation. The Nasrids protected the production aspect of it, and the Genoese, the Valencians, and the Catalans made sure that it got moved very effectively. Lastly, it is a good idea not to forget that these objects moved along with other types of goods as well. One of the most favorite items that were traded along the textiles were goods for performance and festival performances in northern Spain. In particular, swords and anything that had to do with the juego de cañas, or these horsemanship tourneys that lasted well into the 17th century. Documentation tells us, in fact, that they were highly desired, expertly sourced by the northern kingdoms, and that, in fact, helped to establish a taste, a very aristocratic taste for theatrical performance, rooted, in fact, on these luxury goods that were flowing from the south. Thank you very much.